how I'm sounding? Is that the best? That's the reason to do it this way?
Yes. So
Like this? Do you want me?
how you sound. You'll be able to hear myself clearly,
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
fine.
it sets a mood. Certainly, when you have you can hear yourself.
Now, do you want
I
the
thought,
mic to
yes.
block me? Not block me? What does it matter?
I think you're good.
Am
I mean,
okay?
I think
Yeah. It's up to you.
I'm looking at your face right now on the
Is
screen.
that fine?
I think it's out of the way. So I mean, yeah, as long as it's not directly in that line of sight, I think you should be good.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I mean, we could just kind of jump into. I already started recording. I don't know if that's. You're the lawyer. Do I have to let you know beforehand if I start recording? I think so, right?
I have no idea. There's some rules for phone calls, but I don't know for live things. I'm not sure.
How is the volume?
Uh,
Do you want me to turn your volume
fine.
like in your headset
no,
up?
it's fine. It's
Okay.
not louder. This is loud enough.
Got it. I'm turning yours up just because I can kind
Just
of
feel like
hear
I'm
you outside
like
of the headphones.
on a lounge chair sitting back here. So.
Yeah, I hope it's comfortable. Do you want an extra pillow? I've got two over here.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure,
Okay.
I'll take one.
There you go. Take this one.
Let's see. Let's see how that works.
See if that's better for your back support. Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, that's good.
A little bit. Thanks for bearing
Otherwise,
with me.
I feel like I'm going to sleep.
Well, do you prefer? I apologize. I should have asked you when I first met you. Do you prefer Randall, Randy?
Most people call me Randy. It's fine.
Most people call you Randy.
Used to Randy.
All right.
Randall. So I use Randall or even E. Randall because my legal first name is Eric.
There you go.
After my mom's father. So I sign my name E. Randall or, write it, type it out and then sign it. So when I was lawyering, it was always E. Randall Schoenberg.
It's a strong name. I've always I've always thought that strong names like that carry a lot of weight because the strong names like that, I feel like you have a lot to live up to, and you especially because for those that maybe haven't read the title of this podcast yet, your last name is Schoenberg. Did I pronounce that correctly?
I say Schoenberg. I had a elementary school teacher who always said Schoenberg. A lot of people say Schoenberg, but I say Schoenberg, which is almost German. So in German, it would be Schoenberg, like that. But Berg sounds weird, so I like Schoenberg. And the joke is I always say it's like Goethe, and then people look at me like, who's Goethe? And he's the most famous German author of all time, like Shakespeare for Germans, but a lot of Americans don't know who he is. So, and it's spelled Goethe, right?
We're not the most cultured folk out here, especially in that realm of things. And for those that aren't familiar with that last name, could you just let the audience know who your grandfather? Was it your grandfather?
Yeah, my father's father, who would be 150 years old this year. He was 63 when my dad was born. Was Arnold Schoenberg. So he is considered the father of modern music, classical music, and it's probably the most important composer of the first half of the 20th century.
Don't be so modest.
So well, I mean,
it's awesome. For those also that don't know, we have connections, obviously, to UCLA. Your grandfather has a building there. I don't actually know what the connection between him and UCLA is.
He fled the Nazis, lived for one winter on the East Coast and was too cold, and he had a doctor who said, go to California, it's better for your asthma. And so he came out here. He was 60 years old. And he ended up teaching for a little bit at USC, actually, first. And then he got a position at UCLA, which was a relatively new school at the time. It started up in the late 1920s. So he taught there and really built their music department. And after he died in 1951, about a decade later, they built a music building and named it after him in his honor. So a lot of people think we paid for the building because that's how a lot of buildings get built.
Sure. This isn't like the Sackler family or anything like that.
This was an honorary title to the building. And so Schoenberg Hall at UCLA, most undergrads there either take a class there or go to a concert there and know what it is. But maybe they don't know why it is. But that's the reason. And he taught there for a number of years. He was actually in those days they had mandatory retirement age, relatively young, and he was allowed to extend actually a couple of years beyond that, but then was forced to retire.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's
In I think he was 70 years old, something like that. So 1944.
70 years back, but back then, years old is like 100.
Yeah, I mean, he died when he was 76. So,
jeez, so working his whole life.
So yeah, he taught. I mean, to support he had a young family again. His first wife had died. He married my grandmother, and they had 3 kids. My dad was the middle one, and so during the war years, the Nazi period, his music wasn't performed in Europe, which was his sort of his main area, and so no royalties. So he had to teach for a living and relied on teaching and commissions. And he had some famous pupils, certainly very famous ones when he was teaching in Austria and Germany, but in the United States also. Probably John Cage is his most famous. He's very well known for sort of chants and music, and a completely different type of music, but a very influential composer as well.
Does music run? Obviously, music runs in your family, but do you have any musical talents?
I have too much. I say it's like waves. When 2 waves come at each other from different sides, they sort of flatline in the middle. Sure. And that's like me, because my mom's father, Eric Zeisel, was also a very good and pretty well-known composer, also from Austria. And my dad's mother's brother, Rudolf Kolisch, was a famous violinist. So I have a lot of important music people in the family, but no real talent. I played violin in high school in orchestra, and I was so bad that the conductor, who's still a friend of mine, asked me to quit.
He asked you to quit. Wow.
So because I was doing too many other things and not focusing on music. So I was not good. And people think I'm being modest, and then if you would listen to me, you would realize it's not modesty. It's like, when you're a kid, you think, oh, if I just played more, if I practice, I'll be the best. I'll be in the Olympics, right? I'll be the best basketball player. I'll be the best baseball player, tennis, or whatever. And, it just doesn't happen for everybody. So I'm sort of an average tennis player. Yeah. And
I am too an average tennis player, but and for like Asian people, that's actually, I feel like that's something to be ashamed of, actually. We're actually pretty good with rackets, so anytime we're just mediocre in anything, that's
I'm
bad.
better at ping pong for whatever reason. I have a completely different persona in ping pong. In tennis, I'm very defensive and just sort of get the ball back and lob. And in table tennis, I'm ferocious. So.
Maybe you should pick up what is it, racquetball? Is it or pickleball?
That's pickleball. I haven't done yet. If you're a tennis player, you sort of like pickleball. You sort of avoid it.
Totally. My dad is a tennis.
I'm sure I'll give in eventually.
Yeah, my dad's a tennis player through and through. Anytime we suggest him pick up pickleball, he just kind of scoffs. Yeah. So that's funny. So real quick, Randall, why don't you go by Eric?
So I was the first grandkid on my mom's side. And so I was named after her father, who had died in 1959. I was born in 1966. And my mom wanted to name me after her father, but didn't really feel comfortable calling me the same name. Mm. And
did she call her dad Eric, or was it just
no,
just to have the same name?
He died when she was 19, and she was an only child. And so I should have been Eric Arnold, but my mom's a language teacher. She became a German professor, and she says, you can't say Eric Arnold. It has a glottal sound in the beginning. So you have to say Eric Arnold, and that doesn't flow. So I became Eric Randall. Randall, Randol, is actually an anagram of Arnold.
Oh, there you go.
So same letters mixed up, just like my father, who's Ronald. And then after me, they decided, okay, so everybody in the family has to have this anagram as a middle name.
Did you carry on the tradition with your kids?
So I did not.
Wow, really? The thing stopped with you,
Randall. I mean, my sisters are Marlena Lorend Schoenberg, and then Frederick Roland. Roland is another good anagram. And then for my little sister, Melanie, she's Melanie Raldon, Raldon, which is a little bit of a stretch, but there's not that many more anagrams, like Nardal, Lonard, Orland.
There's only so many.
Drainal would be a good one, I thought. But so our daughter is Dora, which is a partial anagram, and then our second kid is Nathan Arnold. So he has the Arnold again, and then we broke the mold for our youngest son, Joey.
Just it's enough with
Joseph
this. Yeah.
Samuel, so
We're really running out of anagrams here.
He doesn't get any anagrams.
That's funny. Well, I think, we're not here to talk about your grandfather. We're not here to talk about your name in particular, but I am very interested to share your story with anyone who might be listening. Just real quick, there is a famous movie that you are true life story, and Ryan Reynolds is depicted as you in that film.
Or I'm depicted.
Or you're depicted as
by Ryan Reynolds.
Yes.
Yeah. See, can't you see? I look just like him. I guess if you're listening to this, you can't.
I was going to say, do you get any type of do you get any say on who they choose, or are you like, you know what, Ryan Reynolds, you passed the test?
When the producers were, when they made the film, they bought my life rights, which they'd sign a contract and they give you a little money and they can do whatever you want, whatever they want with your story. And but they did talk to me, and the screenwriter talked to me as they wrote the script, and then they were talking about like who to get to play me, and I said, I thought it'd be some sort of schlubby Jewish guy like Jonah Hill, right? That's who I suggested. Apparently, he turned down the role.
Really? Okay. Who else was like up for the role for this?
I don't know exactly, but they after Helen Mirren decided she wanted to play my client Maria Altmann. Yeah. Then it became a film, right? Because anything Helen Mirren does, turns to gold.
Exactly.
And so then they shopped around and got
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah. Ryan Reynolds. And
so Jonah Hill was like the backup, and they were like, okay, if we really get lucky, if Helen Mirren signs on, we're going to go after that guy. And luckily
Ryan Reynolds was sort of at a low point in his career, actually, at that time. I think we turned around his career, because right after that he did Deadpool and all these other things.
There you go.
He's become a superstar again. But when they told me his name, I still remember I think I was driving, and then I like, is he the guy in The Proposal with Sandra Bullock? That was the only Ryan Reynolds film that I had seen.
That movie.
And I'm middle-aged guy. I'm not his demographic, right? But I found out when I mentioned it to any female, like, Ryan Reynolds.
That's right. Anyone who's hasn't seen the film, Ryan Reynolds is in it. He's in his kind of peak physical form.
Yeah, he wears a t-shirt in one scene. It looks all ripped.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the only movie I've seen of him that doesn't have his shirt off. Though.
Right.
So,
well, they gave the funny thing is they made him wear glasses, and I wear contacts. I mean, I would wear glasses at night, but anyway, wear contacts. But they gave him glasses to make him look smart, like I'm supposed to be, right? And then in the end, they had, because it's sort of based on a true story, so they have a panel with a picture of me, and they added glasses to the picture of me.
What?
So I would look like Ryan Reynolds, who they added glasses to make.
They photoshopped the glasses onto you, and wait, you didn't know about this till afterwards?
No, until I saw the film. It was too funny.
What?
Too funny.
Okay, we'll have to dive into some of the discrepancies in the movie in real life, but. To get back to it, you are depicted by Ryan Reynolds in this movie, Woman of Gold. He plays an attorney from Los Angeles who helps a family friend retrieve stolen artworks from the Nazis.
Right.
You eventually sued the Austrian government to get them back.
That's correct. That was the story. I was almost 31 years old when my grandmother's best friend, Maria Altmann, called me. And... it's hard to describe.
31 or 32 years old.
Yeah, it was September of 98, right? So that was a long time ago. And my parents were actually in Austria. My grandfather, the composer, his archives had moved from USC to Austria. And that spring there was a grand opening of this Arnold Schoenberg Center, which is still there in Vienna. And I'd been there, and then I came back, and our daughter Dora was born, and I left my, when did I leave my firm? That was later, 2 years later. So I was still downtown at this law firm called Fried, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Jacobson, which was a big New York firm. And I got this call from Maria in September. My parents were back in Vienna, and I had gone online to look at the newspapers to see what was going on in Vienna, if there were anybody writing about anything. And and it's impossible to describe to people how unusual that was in 1998. The newspapers were just coming online, like LA Times, New York Times. They were just 97, 98 coming online. So
but Google's not even around. Like, you're probably using Yahoo search or
Alta Vista, I think.
Whatever.
Alta Vista.
Yeah, this is probably even before I was really using the internet.
So this was really early, and I was in my office and sort of went online and found this Austrian news site, and so I read about this. That I read an article about a law that they were proposing to return Nazi looted artworks, and it mentioned these paintings by Gustave Klimt, some of which I had seen in the Austrian museums because I'd been there a number of times. First time when I was 11 years old, and whenever we would go to this museum called the Belvedere, which was the summer palace of the Habsburgs that was turned into an art museum, my mom would point out, say, "Oh, see that picture, that gold portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer? That's your grandmother's friend Maria Altmann's aunt." So I knew the painting, but I didn't know the history of the painting or anything like that.
It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, Klimt is not a name that people recognize like Picasso, but he's as famous. When you see the pictures, everybody knows it. His most famous painting is The Kiss, which is in half the dorm rooms in the United States.
I'm actually not familiar with that one.
Oh, The Kiss, you'd see it. If you look it up, you'll know it immediately. And this one is sort of, the second or third most famous painting of his. And so I knew this, the painting, but I didn't know that it had been taken by the Nazis or anything like that. And Maria called me up then that day, and I said, "Oh, I know why you're calling, because there's this article about this new law, and they're talking about your aunt's painting and all that."
As fate would have it.
And
that's so crazy.
And so that's how it started. So we got together, and she told me the story, and she gave me some documents that she had obtained from her sister's family. Her sister had just died. She was sort of the last one left in her family. And she told me the story, and that's how it started. And we went on this long journey. It took 8 years. So we're not going to have time to tell everything about it, but it was a long ordeal.
I didn't realize it took 8 years. I mean, obviously in the film, it just kind of,
It's
a couple years later, 2 years later. Exactly. I didn't realize it took you 8 years to resolve that entire issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so Maria also has, as you mentioned, she is friends with your grandmother. Right.
My grandmother had died while I was still in college in 1987. So this was, 10 years or so later.
Gotcha. And then she reached out to your mother, who reached out to you.
She tried to reach my mom, but because my mom had kept up with her, and but my mom was with my father in Austria, so she had my number, and she called me.
Okay,
so that's how it started.
So let's take this far, far, far back, because I think people, obviously the case is really interesting, but how the painting came to be, how it was stolen, all of that's super interesting. Do you mind kind of diving into the history of Adele and how the artworks were stolen in the first place? Yeah,
so Gustave Klimt, as I mentioned, was this sort of very famous Austrian artist, the best artist of his time, sort of beginning of the 20th century. And he was at first a very academic painter, did a lot of commissions for government buildings and things like that, big giant murals, and then started becoming a more modern impressionist style, and was supported by a lot of nouveau riche families, I would say, especially a lot of Jewish families who had, when Jews were finally allowed to own property and move where they wanted to in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was after 1867, so after the Civil War here in the U.S., just to give that time frame. A lot of Jewish families came into the capital city of Vienna because they were allowed to live there now, and not all of them became wealthy. My family certainly didn't, but some of them, of course, became super wealthy, and the Bloch-Bauers were one of these families where they ran a sugar company and banking and all these type of things.
That was really interesting too. I remember hearing about this speech because sugar, when you think of sugar production, you think of like the tropics, the islands,
like sugar cane, like from Hawaii,
like
right?
That. Yeah, so like a sugar empire in Austria sounds.
Yeah, well, they use sugar beets.
Yeah,
so they grow in the ground, and it's very plentiful, I guess, in Bohemia, where the Blochs were from. Anyway, so they amassed this money, and what do you do when you have a big house and you need to put stuff in it? So you commission a famous artist to do a portrait of your wife, right? And so Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer had his wife Adele portrayed by Klimt in 2 portraits, and then they bought some landscapes and all sorts of other artworks. Adele died relatively young of meningitis in her early 40s in the 1920s, and then it was just Ferdinand who was a widower.
Is that even young back then? I don't even, what was
Yeah,
the,
I mean,
he was young,
yeah,
but, you know.
Yeah. She died. It was sort of a tragic thing. It doesn't happen today because we have antibiotics.
Yeah.
But back then,
Penicillin.
if you got some infection or something, you would die. So she died relatively young, and Ferdinand then lived with these paintings until the Nazis came in 1938. They took over Austria. He had to flee because one of the first things that the Nazis did when they invaded places, and Austria was the first, was they would then just sort of pillage from Jewish homes, right? And so especially the wealthy Jews had to either flee or they were arrested. He managed to flee and ended up first in Czechoslovakia, where they had an estate, and then the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia. So he went to Zurich, Switzerland, and was kept there. He didn't have any money because the Nazis had taken everything, but he was put up in a hotel by some friends and then died at the end of the war. So the question is, what happens next after the war? He had no kids. He and Adele were unable to have kids, and so he had these nieces and nephews, and Maria was the youngest niece, and she was one of his heirs. And but the nieces and nephew, they were his heirs, and they tried to get property back, and they got some things back after the war, but it wasn't easy. Austria didn't make it easy. Austria was an occupied country for 10 years after World War II. So under U.S. and Soviet occupation, they were required to pass laws that allowed Jewish families to recover some of their property. Those laws didn't come into effect for 3 years. So after the war, so it wasn't until 1948 that Jewish families could actually start to recover things. And they were moderately successful, but not overly successful, getting property back. A lot of it was unavailable. And with regard to the Klimt paintings, the Austrian museums, which had ended up with these paintings, told the family that the paintings had been given to the museum by Adele Bloch-Bauer, by the woman in the painting, when she died in 1925, which wasn't really the case, but the heirs didn't really know this. And they had a lawyer in Austria who agreed with the Austrian officials not to fight over the Klimt painting so he could get other paintings out of the country. Austria used their export restrictions on artworks to...
They have like a tax, kind of like that.
It's more of a patrimony law. A lot of countries have it, like Mexico has it for pre-Columbian artifacts. Egypt has it. Italy has it.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, a lot of countries that have old civilizations want to keep things inside the country, and so they enacted laws. These are, in the last 150 years, they've enacted laws to keep everything inside, make it illegal to export things. And so Austria had one of these for Austrian artworks, anything by an artist who had been dead for 20 years. Mm-hmm. So Klimt died in the flu epidemic in 1918, so by 1948, he's been dead for 30 years.
So are you not able to export those paintings, or right. Do you have to pay extra, or how does that work?
So they can just say no. They have to stay in the country, in Austria. The U.S. doesn't actually recognize those laws because we're a net importer.
Sure.
Of
we're
artworks.
a new country. Yeah.
So we want all this stuff. So we don't really recognize those laws. We recognize when the countries say that they own the property. But in this case, the family could have kept artworks, but in Austria. And since none of them lived in Austria anymore, the ones who managed to escape, Maria came to Los Angeles. The rest of her family was up in Vancouver, so they didn't want to go back to Austria after everything they knew had been destroyed, and so in order to get some artworks out, they gave up others. And if you fast forward 50 years, in 1998, right before Maria called me, there was a journalist who had done a series of articles in the Austrian newspapers, a guy named Hubertus Czernin, and he did an expose on this extortionate behavior after World War II, where a lot of Jewish families, not just the Bloch-Bauers, but Austrian branch of the Rothschild family, and later, and Zuckerkandl, there are all these big sort of wealthy art collecting families, were subject to this extortionate procedure where the Austrians would say, well, in order to get these other artworks out, you have to donate these ones and leave them in our museums. And so Austria then in 1998, to its credit, decided to enact a law that would allow for the return of those artworks that had been left behind.
Got it.
In order to get export permits. And it seemed to us, when I reviewed the documentation that Maria had, because she had letters from her family lawyer from the 1940s describing what had happened, that it seemed like these paintings really fit very well under that law.
And did this journalist reach out to you, or how does it?
He did not initially. So it was only after I started representing Maria that we came into contact, and I didn't have all the documents that he had found in Austria. He didn't have the ones I had, so we sort of traded. They actually didn't let him copy documents in the archives, so Maria had to give him permission to go back and make copies of things. And
this guy's he's just a journalist.
Yeah, he was a journalist. He was.
He's not like getting paid for helping, like going the extra mile.
No, he was just a crusading journalist. He was in his early 40s at the time. Unfortunately, he developed this really terrible disease called mastocytosis. So during the course of this, he was getting sicker and sicker. And finally, at the end in 2006, right after we got the paintings back, he came to see them displayed here in Los Angeles, and he died a month later. At age 50. But he was really a hero. And actually, he was famous already as a journalist in Austria because he had covered the first priest sex abuse scandal in Austria long before it became a thing here in the United States.
In Austria? So, the Austrian government, or the leaders over there, are probably not a big fan of this guy's work.
Yeah, well, I mean, he also very famously uncovered the past of Austria's president, Kurt Waldheim. So it was a big scandal in the 80s. Kurt Waldheim had been UN General Secretary, and they became president of Austria, and it turned out that he had sort of hidden his Nazi past. Not that he was a big Nazi, but he was in the Wehrmacht, in the German army, and had been stationed in Yugoslavia. Where
not a big Nazi, just a small Nazi.
Yeah, but the issue was that he lied about it, right? Like it's one thing to have been in the German army as a 20-year-old, and now you're 70, and you sort of admit what happened, but he just sort of denied that he did anything or saw anything.
It would be tempting to leave off your LinkedIn profile, for sure.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, there's a big question of how he could have become UN General Secretary, because really everybody should have known about this. But anyway, Hubertus Czernin was one of the journalist who uncovered really the evidence of that, and so he was already a really famous person for writing tough articles. And when he wrote this expose on the paintings that had been extorted, it made a big impact, and that caused the Austrian government then to pass this law.
Just real quick, you gotta just really appreciate people like that, big journalists that go extra mile, put their lives on the line. Potentially, I mean, that's got to be pretty scary. Not that I ever think the Austrian government would ever put your life on it, but did you ever feel like there was any type of risk in doing all of this, like maybe to your career or like anything?
Yeah, for me, there's only one sort of looking back. I would meet with anybody when I came to Vienna, and there was one time where this guy asked for a meeting, and he met with me, and it's like his fingernails were dirty, and I just remember he would
murder. He
didn't come across as the typical guy who was interested in Gustave Klimt and art and law, and I got the feeling afterwards he was sort of feeling me out, and I thought he might have been associated with, there was a right-wing party that had come into power at that time in Austria, and just got the feeling he might have been somehow feeling me out.
How did this all come about? Yeah, how did you meet this guy?
He just wrote me. I would meet with anybody because I was always looking for allies.
I've got clean fingernails, just so you see. Right.
Absolutely. But yeah, that was the only time I thought, oh, did I just do something weird?
Get myself in a weird bad situation. Yeah. So did you wrote this guy and then you met this gentleman?
Yeah. I just invited him to meet with, because I was always wanting to tell Maria's story, because what had happened after they passed this law. And we contacted them. They said, "Oh, we have this commission. We're going to decide what to do." And I said, "We have all these documents," and they weren't interested in the documents. And I said, "No, you really need to see these." And I sent them anyway. And then they made a decision. They said, "No, we're not going to give back these Klimt paintings because Adele Bloch-Bauer gave them to us in 1925." And that we thought really wasn't true. She did say in her will that she wanted her husband to give the paintings to the museum when he died, but he didn't do that because they had been taken from him by the Nazis.
Okay.
And so the question was, is her request binding on her husband? And already when she died, Maria's father, who was a lawyer, had written that it wasn't binding. And the lawyer in 1948 also looked at it and said it wasn't binding. And I had another lawyer in 1998 look at it, or 99 look at it, and he said, no, it's not binding. And then they came back and said, no, we thought it was, we think it's binding. Yeah. And I thought, okay, no, that's clearly not 100% true. It's at least arguable, since everybody else I talked to says it isn't. And so we had to decide what to do. And I went, first we tried to actually sue in Austria, but it was too expensive, meaning that in order to file a lawsuit in European countries, it's a different situation. In the United States, you're obligated to pay the court costs of the other side if you lose. So that's not true in the U.S. The U.S. is much more plaintiff friendly. That's why we have a lot of consumer protection lawsuits and things like that.
Throw lawsuits against the wall. Yeah.
Right. But in Europe, it's a big deal, because if you sue and you lose, then you're liable for all the attorney's fees and everything on the other side. So they make you put up a bond to cover that. And it's a percentage of the value at stake in the litigation. So when you're suing for paintings that we thought might be worth $100 million, you have to put $2 million on deposit in the court. And Maria Altmann didn't have that, so we applied to.
How old is she at this time?
She was already in her 80s.
Okay, so she's at her tail end of...
She's 82, 83, and...
She doesn't have $2 million to just...
No. And so we filed a petition to decrease it, which you can do. And they said, no, she doesn't have to pay more than everything she has. She just has to pay everything she has, like all of her life savings, everything, not her house.
Just live with you, Randall.
She could keep her house, but all of her savings... and she's like a widow living in her 80s.
Sure. So they're shaking her down pretty much.
Yeah. So we said, no, that's not going to happen. And then I very naively thought, well, why can't she sue in Los Angeles? She's lived here for 60 years. She's been a citizen.
Yeah.
She was already a citizen before this thing happened in 1948. And
why was she not able to sue here?
And so the rule is that in general, you can't sue a foreign country. There's something called sovereign immunity.
I didn't know that.
The paintings were owned by a country, by Austria. They were owned part of this federal museum.
Okay.
And so there's a rule that you can't, in general, sue a foreign country. They're immune, sovereign immunity. Okay. And it's a long-standing thing. It goes back hundreds of years.
Well, that's convenient. I mean, they could just take any of your stuff and be like, you can't.
I mean, it's true also in the United States, you can't sue the state or the federal government unless the state allows you to sue them, unless they have a law allowing you to sue.
Okay.
It's like,
all right.
You're the lawyer. It comes from the divine right of kings and things like that, right? So, so that's the way it's set up. But there was a law passed in 1976 that provided various exceptions. The most common one is when a country is engaged in a commercial transaction, right? So you're buying uniforms for your military or something like that. The government doesn't pay, you can sue, right? So that type of thing.
Okay.
But there's another exception which hadn't been used very much, called the expropriation exception. And that exception says that when the suit against another country is for property that was taken in violation of international law, and the property is owned or operated by an agency or instrumentality of a foreign state which is engaged in a commercial activity in the United States, then you can sue. And this was passed in 1976. No one really knows why that language was put in. I think the authors were thinking about things with Cuba at the time. So when property is taken in violation of international law, it usually means property taken by a state from citizens of another state. So the way it works in international law is a government is allowed to take property from its own people, but citizens of a foreign state, they can't really take it away without compensation. That would be a violation of international law.
Okay.
So I think they were thinking about Cuba at the time, but I looked at this law and I thought, well, okay.
How did you? So, sorry, if I just got under. This is still when this case is going on. This is still like early 2000s, right?
Yeah. It was. So we filed the lawsuit ultimately in August of 2000.
Okay, so like when you're. Forgive me for being dumb. how do you find this case? Like, what is the process? Like, are you just going through books and books and books? Like,
it's a good question. That's totally fine. So I was a litigator. I graduated law school in 1991. So I'd been out for like 8, 9 years. And after 6 years at one firm, I switched to another firm. But every litigator has these two books, like Rules of Civil Procedure, and then they'll have the equivalent for the U.S. Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, and those have these statutes in them, sort of rules and statutes governing sort of procedural issues, how you file certain lawsuits, how do you file certain motions, what are the rules for summary judgment, and things like that. And so in this rule book that's on every litigator's desk, they have a copy of they include the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act of 1976, because that governs when you can sue a foreign state. So that's how I found it, right? It's in the rule book. You just look it up, okay. And that wasn't hard. Figuring out what it meant was a little bit trickier. There was one case that had gone on in the Ninth Circuit against Argentina. Actually, a Jewish family named Cederman had been. They had a hotel and some other property in Argentina, and in one of the anti-Semitic incidents there, when it was under military dictatorship, they took away the hotel, and the Ninth Circuit had allowed a U.S. member of the family to sue Argentina over this hotel. It was actually the longest running case in the Ninth Circuit history. I think it went on like 20 years. Wow. So there was one precedent that I could look up, and I thought, well, property taken by the Nazis, that should be in violation of international law, taking property from Jewish families, and all I needed to show was that the property was owned or operated by an agency or instrumentality of a foreign state. So in this case, the museum was actually a federal museum. It was an agency of the federal government of Austria. And then the last prong was that I had to show that museum was engaged in a commercial activity in the United States. So I found actually a book that they had published, a guidebook to the museum, and it was published by Yale University Press. So I thought, okay.
How did you come across this book? Just like in their bookstore?
I was in Barnes & Noble or Brentano's books, I think, in Century City, and found it.
You just came across it?
I may have looked up online or some index at that time, whatever they had in 1999 or 2000. There wasn't Amazon yet, I don't think.
Right. You can't reverse image search on Google or anything like that.
It's not quite as easy, but ultimately I found that, and I figured, okay, well, that should be enough. And my firm was not interested in lawsuits like this. My firm was a big New York firm. They represented clients that could pay.
Right. So you're really putting your reputation on the line.
Yeah, they were not interested, and so I ended up leaving the firm actually, and I went out on my own.
Wow.
And I opened up
How did your wife take that?
Office. We had our second kid, Nathan, in 2000 in July, and
so perfect timing.
I left like a month or two before that, so I take care of the kid a little bit at home, and then I went back in and set up the office, and I wrote out a complaint and filed a complaint for Maria Altmann, and it didn't cost $2 million. It was like $165 to file the lawsuit in federal court. And the idea, I have an email that I wrote Maria at that time saying, this is just a way to keep the case alive, because the Austrians had refused to return the paintings. And so now, it's a political issue when you're dealing with a foreign country, right? These are people, it's not
it seems like
property, right?
They're unfair fight, right? Like, do you ever feel hopeless in that sense?
It's the hard part is getting to the decision makers, right? Because the decision maker is just a bureaucrat. It's someone who's in an official capacity. It's not their property that's being taken away or given away. They're just sort of keeping it because they can, right? And how do you get to those people? So that was very frustrating. And politics, I learned a lot through the course of this. But the way it works, the press plays a big part, because what do politicians need? They need votes, right?
Yeah.
And so how are voters influenced? It's by the press,
media,
right?
Yeah.
And media. And so
you just took to the streets.
Right. So the way to get at them is to make sure there's a lot of press articles and embarrass them, make them look bad, and that type of thing. So
what do you what kind of language is being used in these? I mean, you're probably coordinating with some of these media outlets.
I wasn't really coordinating. I developed sort of an email list at the time. This is also old-fashioned, but yeah, I mean, I just sort of searched for media contacts and also politicians. They had the big, it's the first time people started putting their emails on public websites, right? So I'd just rip all the emails off and add them to a giant email and then spam out information. And each time something happens, so if you file a complaint, then you sort of send out a press release to this big, massive email list, and you hope that someone picks it up and actually reads it, and maybe one of the journalists will write about it, and then once one journalist writes about it, then you take that and you send it out again to your whole list, and it snowballs.
Right.
Sometimes there was one time where something really important happened, and no one reported on it, and then a few weeks later, something really not so important happened. I wrote that, and that somehow got picked up and allowed me then to get the other important information out, right? So you'd have to just continuously feed the press and the media, in order to keep the case.
Well, they're just looking for stories, right? So if you're just feeding them, then why not? It's a good strategy.
That was my strategy. I was working all alone, didn't really have any help to do it, so I had to sort of do everything very efficiently.
And I'm guessing, so I guess what is the general public perception of everything that's going on? I mean, I'm guessing there's shame in the fact that they're not giving these paintings back.
Not so much. Most people will believe the story when the government says it, right? So if the government says, "Oh, Adele Bloch-Bauer gave us these paintings, and when she died," it's like, okay, that must be true, right? Like, I think most people thought that they were telling the truth.
I guess, are they painting her out to be some sort of like woman who's just after a paycheck after all of these years?
There was some of that. I mean, they have to be careful a little bit because she's a victim of the Nazis. She had to flee, right? And so they can't be too aggressive that way. But there's ways of saying that without saying it, right? And so there was a lot of that. And there were the different newspapers. So there was the more left-wing paper that this Hubertus Czernin wrote for, and that would be more pro Maria Altmann. And then there would be the conservative, pro-government newspaper, and they'd always write the counterexamples, and they would there was one journalist who would write articles and never contact me and ask me for my side. That was
that seems pretty frustrating.
Very frustrating to me, and like, how can you write about it and not even ask what I think, right? But
or just write to you last minute, and then when you don't reply, just write Randall, just no comment.
Yeah, it's just anyway. There's some journalists are lazy like that. There was another aspect of this was really funny, and again, it had to do with online stuff. So the newspapers were putting things online, and because of the time change, the newspapers in Vienna would put their paper to bed around 6 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. their time, and it would immediately go up on their website, and so that would be around 9 a.m., 10:30 a.m. my time. And so I would then be in the office, right, and I would immediately see the articles, and I would read them, I'd copy them, I'd respond to them, and then blast it out to my list. And everybody there was used to picking up the paper in the morning. Right? Like, it get delivered to them, and they'd read it in the office in the morning. And so I'm sending it to them while they're still, like, going to sleep at night. And they're like, Randy, how do you know the news before we do? But they were not used to getting things instantaneously. Now that's so common that people can't even imagine not knowing news 5 minutes after it happened. But in those days, people were used to getting their news sort of once a day from the morning news.
Exactly. 24-hour news.
Right.
Exactly.
Did not exist. And so I took advantage of that. So I was sort of always ahead of the game a little bit for them, even though I was all the way over here 9 hours later or earlier. Sorry.
Oh, crazy. Yeah. Okay, so I guess walk us through this. So what, you find this book that they're selling? They're selling posters of this?
Well, there's all sorts of posters and coasters and slippers
everything.
And scarves and whatever. It's a very famous image. So there's stuff all over the place.
I guess, can you go back and sue for like royalties or
no, there's not, because the artist has copyrights, right? And
That's true.
So his copyrights ran out already. And anyway,
I don't even. What happens? Like, if you're an artist like that, you die. Who owns those copy? Like the family?
Yeah. So like with my grandfather, for example, when he died, or either of my grandfathers, the copyrights go to the wife and kids.
That makes sense. So. That makes sense, right? That's why like the whole Jackson family is still thriving.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Strong.
I'm sure of.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so how long did that whole process take? From the second you discovered these books and you guys took them to court,
right?
How long did that drag out?
So I filed the lawsuit in 2000, in the summer of 2000, and the case took another 6 years because what happened was they hired. First, I had to serve them, meaning deliver the lawsuit. But when you're suing a foreign country, it's not like you take a process server and they say tagged. You're
not like
it,
someone
right?
wears a
like
Domino's
like in the movies
pizza costume and it's like, "Are you Randall?"
You can't do that to Austria. So I had to go through the U.S. State Department to the U.S. Embassy, and then they have a formal way of delivering it. So that took some time. But I got it served, and then they hired a firm in the United States named Proskauer Rose, and found an attorney here who represented them, and that attorney filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, saying that it wasn't.
I'm guessing that's a bigwig firm
valid.
too.
It's a famously big Jewish firm. The lawyer Scott Cooper wasn't.
Is
Jewish.
Is it Jewish firm?
Oh, I mean, it's like Proskauer and Rose. The founders of the firm were very, very important.
Yeah, I was gonna say it takes some balls to like hire a Jewish firm to.
Yeah, well, that's what they anyway. Lawyers. I mean, you have to realize lawyers, your job is to defend someone, right? So if you're criminal defense, you're going to defend criminals, right? That's going to be your job. So you can't really fault a lawyer for taking on a client in a case. That's what your job is.
It would just seem like an extra slap in the face to be like, oh yeah, we're also going to hire a Jewish
law firm. I mean, the lawyer wasn't Jewish, but I heard that they thought he was, which was really funny.
I would have definitely been in the courtroom and been like, shame.
I mean, I did a little of that. But they, of course, they tried to dismiss the case, and we had a really wonderful judge named Florence Marie Cooper. And
where is this? Is this in
federal court here?
Okay.
One of the issues was whether it should be transferred to D.C., which she decided not to do.
Okay.
She could have dismissed the case on a number of different grounds. It's saying, it should be tried in Austria or something like that, but she didn't. And because there was a sovereign immunity issue, then Austria was able to appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And that was in 2001, something like that. And the Ninth Circuit meets in Pasadena here in Los Angeles in these big fancy courthouse. And I went and argued for the first time in the Ninth Circuit.
Is this like
judges.
I guess, is this like a highly publicized case out here? Is there like a lot of people in the audience?
At that time, there were some articles. It's a funny thing. When the first article was written about the case, I got contacted by this guy. Said, we make plaques of articles. I thought, ooh, that's great. My first article. Wow, I'm in the news, right?
Yeah.
And so I got one, and then 6 months later, there's another article because something happened in the case. I'm like, ooh, that's an even better article. I have to get another plaque. And each time there was something bigger and bigger happening, I had to get another one of these framed things, and so now I have like dozens of them because it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. I never anticipated that.
I thought the story was going to end and then he invoices you at the end for all of these framed articles.
It cost me a bundle. No, the issue is like, where do you put them? My wife doesn't want them in the house, right? So it's like, enough of you. So I argued in the Ninth Circuit, and everybody thought I was going to lose. Pretty much,
and you're still on your own. Your own at this point.
Well, I had partnered up with a partner named Don Burris. He was an older attorney I met in the building that I'd rented some space in, and he needed a partner because his partner left, and you can't have a partnership with one person; you have to have two. So he said, "Do you want to make it Burris and Schoenberg?" I said, "Great," and he gave me a nice office. I could see out into Santa Monica, and so I was happy, and I was doing regular work to pay the bills because Maria Altmann, we had an arrangement that if she won, which no one expected, that I would get a portion of it, called a contingency fee. But I had to do real work to earn some money to pay for the kids.
Sure, yeah.
So I was doing that type of stuff, but I argued in the Ninth Circuit, and they took a long time to decide, and and finally they decided and they ruled in our favor, and they rejected Austria's arguments, all of them. So I was really happy, and I thought, wow, we're going to get to do the case. And then the U.S. government actually filed a brief asking the Ninth Circuit to revise and change its opinion, which they can do. So they can have a petition for rehearing. So Austria filed. The U.S. government agreed with Austria that the rule that we had established that we could sue under this Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act in a case that concerned events that happened in the 30s and 40s. They didn't like it for whatever reason, and so they weighed in on the other side. So now we were opposing not just the Austrian government, but also the U.S. government.
Jeez, okay.
Yeah, so it's not a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a good development.
Cards completely stacked
yes,
against you.
yes.
And yet you're just still full steam
So,
ahead.
well, yeah, at that point we just have to wait, and the Ninth Circuit then fortunately did not rehear the case. And so then it became ripe for them to petition the Supreme Court, Austria. So the Austria petitioned the Supreme Court. The U.S. government was part of that. And so when you have a foreign country complaining about a decision, and also the U.S. government agrees with the foreign country, it makes it pretty likely that the Supreme Court's going to take the case.
Is your wife at this point just like, oh, Randy, you better know what you're doing because this does not look good?
I mean, not really. She was supportive, and it was not taking an inordinate amount of my time, right? I was still able to do my other things. And so, no, I mean, everybody was hoping that we would be able to continue, but who knows, right? So then when the Supreme Court agreed to take the case, then, of course, everybody was certain again that I was going to lose. And I was not very confident, right? Because especially those days, the Ninth Circuit was known as very liberal and the Supreme Court very conservative. And so, the only reason they would take the case is to change the outcome, right? And rule in Austria's favor. So everybody expected us to lose, but I went then to Washington to argue, and obviously first time for me to argue in the Supreme Court. And so I had this sort of gallows humor, like, what do I have to lose, right? Everybody thinks I'm going to lose anyway.
You're David in this situation.
I'm just going to enjoy this, right? And so I went in much more relaxed than I would be now, right? And I was not the first person to speak in the case because we had won in the lower court. So first Austria's lawyer spoke, then the U.S. government lawyer spoke, again, against us.
Yeah.
And so it seemed by the time I was able to get up there and speak that at least some of the justices were entertaining our side of the argument.
What's it like for those that don't know what it's like to be in a Supreme Court?
I actually visited one time before because I had a housemate, James Foreman, who was clerked for Justice O'Connor. So I'd actually seen it once before, and it is the best show in D.C., especially if you're a lawyer. If you're a law geek, it's just the ultimate.
Why is that? What about it?
I mean, just to see this very high-level argument about important legal issues, and it would bore ordinary people, but I remember when my housemate was clerking there and I visited, one of the cases involved whether New York could something like send its trash to New Jersey for processing and require payment. It had to do with the Commerce Clause or the Dormant Commerce Clause. And again, you'd have to be a lawyer to really appreciate how bizarre and interesting some of the legal issues could be. But I just thought it was just the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And anyway, then
it's like the pinnacle for you,
yeah,
right?
For years later to be actually arguing the Supreme Court, I mean, it's a dream. What you don't realize until you actually get up there and have to say, may it please the court, my name is, right, is that you actually stand really close to them, and there are 9 justices, and it's so
How
close,
Like
it's so close that you can't see all 9 in your field of vision, right?
Okay, yeah.
So you have to turn to the left to see that one, but then you're missing these.
So when you're talking to them, you're just panning back and forth.
Yeah, it's sort of from all sides, and I was prepared. I did these practice sessions called moot courts. I did 3 of those, and so I was prepared for all types of questions, I thought. And you don't give a speech either. It's not sort of a monologue, like in the movies where there's this big long speech. No, they interrupt you because what they do is they review the case, they read the materials or with their clerks, and they review and they sort of have an idea of what they're going to do, but they don't talk to each other before the argument. They talk after, right? And so sometimes they talk to each other through their questioning to you, right? So like they're asking to you, but they're really saying, hey, watch out for this argument, or, what about this, right? Because
Sure.
they're arguing with each other. They're pre-arguing.
Right. And you're
they're
just,
the one, and you're just the vehicle for the pre-argument, right? So
that must be very interesting.
So you never know what's really going on in their heads. And so I started out by giving sort of an outline. I'd been taught to do that. And I said, there are 4 grounds for affirming the Ninth Circuit. Ground 1 is, and then I finished the first sentence. And I can't lie about this, by the way, because it's taped. So you can listen to it on oyas.org if you want. And so I finished this first sentence. And then I get this question from Justice Souter, who was from New England. He had a very strong sort of New England drawl, and he was probably the smartest justice on the court at that time. And he started asking me this long, convoluted question. I mean, just went on and on, if this and that. And it got to the end, and I didn't know what he was asking. Like, I didn't understand the question. First question, right?
Yeah.
And so you can hear.
Dare I say? Right. Can you repeat the question?
Right. So you can listen on the tape. I go, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I don't think I understood the question. And there's gasps from the audience, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And he was very magnanimous and sort of rephrased it, but all the other justices smiled as if to say, yeah, we didn't understand it either. Like, what the hell is he talking about? And so it
that
was
definitely lightens the mood.
Oh, it was total icebreaker, and by accident, by complete accident, right? And so, he rephrased it. I sort of had an idea of what he was talking about, and I just continued. And I had accidentally established credibility with all the justices, right? Because he had asked something that no one understood.
Yeah, and you had the balls to be like, what?
And the answer was, what are you talking about, right? And that was the right answer.
Yeah.
And so after that, it was just a conversation. Like, they would ask questions, and if I knew, I would answer. If I didn't know, I'd say, I don't know, right?
Now you're just free-flowing. You feel...
It was just a regular back and forth. And who was I fooling, right? I was, a kid representing my grandmother's best friend in this completely insane case, trying to sue another country to get paintings that had never left Vienna, right? Like, I mean, no one ever heard of anything like this. So I wasn't sort of pretending, I'm the big expert on sovereign immunity and retroactivity and all these legal concepts. I was just like this guy arguing this crazy case. And it was awesome. I floated out of the courtroom. It was so great. And my dad, who was a retired judge, said, "Oh, you might actually have a chance of winning." And we were all super happy.
Well, I guess what happens, so you wrap up this thing, and they're like, "We gotta speak internally, and we'll get back to you."
Yeah, I mean, they always just they end the argument and submit it, right, and then it's closed, and you go outside. But I came back to Los Angeles, and in LA we have it's called the Daily Journal, which is a legal newspaper. And so there's a big article about it, a few days later in the Daily Journal, and the headline was "Court Likely to Reverse Altmann Case." It was all about how we were going to lose, like a huge article about all the reasons we were going to lose. And I called up the journalist, and I said, and I'm thinking to myself, like, at least he could have said, "Randy did a great job," right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like, no one knows how great this was because it's not broadcast.
At least show the stats, we lost, but the stats are, the stats are awesome.
Like, oh, Randy was so great, but still, right? It was not that. It was just like, it was a bloodbath, right? And so I called him up, and he said, "Oh, I've been reporting for 34 years, and I could tell by the body language you don't stand a chance." I'm like, okay, that's how we thought it was going to happen, right? And so you're probably right. I won't get my hopes up, but do me a favor, call me when the decision comes out, because they don't actually warn you that they're issuing decisions. They just sort of,
it just happens.
One morning they just say, "We have a decision in this case." And
what do you do? Do you just have to check some sort of website or record?
These
how does
days,
that work?
but
back then, how did that work?
The journalists are the ones that are there every morning, right?
Oh, so you just have to be in the courthouse.
Yeah, whoever's in the courthouse will learn about it. And so all the big newspapers and everybody have a person there, especially when it is late in the term in June, when they're issuing a lot of opinions, and they report on it, right? That's their beat. So I said to this guy, this Dave Pike, I said, can you call me when you hear it, because I won't know. And so sure enough, like 3 months later, I get this call, And it's three hours earlier here in LA than DC, right? So I'm making breakfast for the kids. By then we'd had our third kid, Joey, in April, and he calls me and says, "Oh, this is Dave Pike, real serious." I'm like, "Oh, okay, give me the bad news." He said, "No, not bad news. You won 6-3 decision by Justice Stevens." I'm like,
wow,
right?
6-3.
Oh my God,
That's
right?
pretty
Like we actually won.
Yeah.
And so I was so happy, and I tried to reach Maria, but her phone was already off the hook. And
do you like almost pass out at that point, or are you just
I don't remember anything else other than rushing over to Maria's house, and her kids came over. We were celebrating, and people had champagne, and
your wife's looking at new houses. She's like shopping for.
No, I don't know. I don't know what she was doing, but she's probably taking care of the kids because I had to run over to Maria's, and then after like 3 hours, we're like, what did we win? We won the right to start the case. It was just the beginning of the whole case, and it was 2004. It's six years into it.
Yeah,
right?
Wow.
And so you
just have the right to sue.
Yeah, we came down to earth very quickly. It was a big deal, but it was like we had to.
Right, but
we were just at the start.
Battle.
We were not even half. I mean, just the beginning, and you still have all these questions about how are you going to prove things that happened 70 years ago? Like how do you do that? There are no witnesses, right? And there might be a statute of limitations argument and all these other things. And so we went into the sort of normal litigation mode, and about a year later, we were required to do a mediation. So just a court requirement. And I thought, okay, this is not going anywhere, because up to that point, even though I'd asked, they would not talk to us. They wouldn't talk about resolving the case or anything. There was no settlement discussion, nothing.
How is your confidence level after that Supreme Court? Are you like, okay, we got a 50-50 shot? Or are you still thinking like, oh gosh, is this still going to be a...
No, still really...
Big uphill battle.
Yeah, still a big uphill battle. I mean, it was a big victory, but it wasn't nothing was in the bag for sure.
Your wife is just like, starts closing up the newspaper, stops looking at the listings. She's like, God damn you, Randall.
This is not happening anytime soon still, right? And I knew that. I mean, it had taken a long time just to get to that stage. So even if we were to win, there was no way to enforce a judgment. They could appeal it forever, that type of thing. So it was still sort of a quixotic quest. And then we had this mediation. I thought it was going to be nothing. And Maria and I came to the other lawyer's office, and they brought a mediator from Austria. I said, pick whatever mediator you want, because whatever, it's a mediation. You just talk about settling. No. And I thought they weren't interested. And the mediator came in and said, I think both sides want this over with. And Maria was 89 years old at that time. And I said, yeah, we definitely want it over with. Yeah. And he said, well, what about doing an arbitration in Austria? So I said, let me talk to Maria in another room. So I went into this other room, and I had asked them, in 1999, 6 years earlier, can we do an arbitration to resolve this question of the will of Maria's aunt, Adele, because, reading a will, it's a legal question, right? It's not there's nothing else involved. So it was a legal question. We had a dispute over it. Could be decided by an arbitrator.
How was the exact argument again? She wanted her husband to give away the painting, but they weren't hers to give away.
Well, there were two issues. One was that the paintings supposedly belonged to him and not her. This is from a document that Maria's father wrote because he was the lawyer for the family. And he said she makes certain requests which aren't binding. But
what are those requests called when they're not binding again?
It's so in legal terms, it's called precatory language. And the issue is when you're trying to interpret a will, the person who wrote it is dead. Okay.
That makes things a little tough.
So how do you interpret it? And there's a difference between saying, please, after I'm gone, feed the fish, right? Or you must agree to, put my name up in lights every Friday in order to receive money from my estate, right? There's different types of language you can do in a will. And so when someone in this case says, please, my husband, give these to the museum, which is what she said, what does that mean? Does it mean he has to do it, or is it just saying, please do it? Mm-hmm. And maybe I was thinking of fish because it says fishbowl behind you. That's probably what it is.
There you
so
go.
A little suggestion in my head. But anyway, that's precatory language. And so that can be interpreted using regular legal rules and ways of interpreting things. And anyway, so I went to this conference room with Maria, and I said, I think we should do this arbitration. She said, are you crazy? Why would I want my case decided by Austrian arbitrators when I could have these wonderful judges in the Supreme Court, right, who love us, decide the case? And I said,
we just won 6-3 over here.
Yeah. She's like, everybody, the Ninth Circuit loves us, and the district court, right? Like, why would I want to do that? And I said, Maria, you're 89. And if you want it decided in your lifetime, you got to do this, right? Because they can drag this out forever. And even if we win, there was no treaty at that time between the U.S. and Austria that would allow us to enforce it. So this way we can resolve the legal issue and we can get it enforced because we can make it enforceable under this arbitration agreement.
I guess what would be the benefit for them to do that?
That's a good question. I can't put my head inside theirs, but I think they didn't like the idea of having their dirty laundry
aired out
in a U.S. court, right, with U.S. judges who they didn't trust because they had been losing this. They probably didn't trust their lawyer completely now because he said, we're going to win this issue, and then they lost it. So they thought, okay, let's take it out. Let's get it under control.
Risk mitigation.
By Austrian judges. And the way arbitrations work is they pick one, I pick one, and then those two pick a neutral. Mm-hmm. And so they sort of control it a little bit, right, who's going to be at least one and the other one, right? Two of them. So they thought, okay, they're going to be able to do this. I thought, though, that on the legal issue that we were right. And there was a professor who had written a legal opinion for us who was very well respected, who agreed with us on this question. So I thought, it's going to be hard for them to find an arbitrator that's going to disagree with this guy because that's really his expertise. So that was my thinking. And Maria ultimately agreed with me, and thank goodness. It was very naive, just like everything else in the case where we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't have a roadmap to follow. We were just
that's what guessing. Makes this story so interesting.
Yeah. It was each time was just sort of, I feel this is the right way. Let's do it, right? And so we went and actually I went and did the arbitration. It's not like in the film. We can talk about the film and the differences there, but it was just a closed room with the parties. Just the lawyers and the arbitrators, stenographer, and I had an interpreter to help when my German wasn't good enough. But mostly I could do things in German, thank goodness. And so we went and just had this argument for a day. And there are no live witnesses, so it's all about language and are we reading this document correctly? There was some things that are handwritten and hard to read, and so you have to sort of discuss what could that mean, that type of thing. So it was. It was long and grueling, but I expected them to make a decision relatively quickly because the legal issue was relatively straightforward. Like, what does this line in her will mean? Right? But it took them a long time.
What is a long time?
The argument was in September, the arbitration, early September, and it was already January then. And there had been rumors in the Austrian newspaper that we were going to lose and things like that. It was that type of thing. And I went to a neighborhood poker game. Have another one tomorrow night with the same guy. We've been doing this a long time, and I'd lost a little money. Coming home on a Sunday night, a little bit depressed, and it was 9 hours later there, so it was midnight here and 9 a.m. Monday morning, and I got this email on my BlackBerry at the time. I don't know if you remember BlackBerries.
Great. Yeah,
but you can't open up the attachment, right? So you have to go. I had to go to the computer and open up the attachment and then read it. And it's in this weird format that they use in German decisions, and it's all very long-winded. And in German, the verb is at the end of the sentence too, and they write these long things. So it took me a while to figure out what they actually ruled, but they ruled in our favor. So all three judges and arbitrators decided that we were correct. Like the argument I was making, which was the same argument Maria's dad had made in 1926, was that this language was precatory, was not binding on her husband, and the husband wasn't required to give these paintings to the museum when he died, and they were taken from him, and it's not in his will. Leave these with the museum, so they really belonged to the family, and the only reason that they stayed in the museum was that their lawyer after the war in 1948 made this deal that he would get other paintings out of the country by leaving the Klimt paintings there. So it fell under this new law. So without the new law, this wouldn't have happened, right? So without Hubertus Czernin, the journalist, writing that expose, the Austrian government proposing that new law and passing that new law, none of this would have happened. But it still took 8 years to get the Austrians to follow their own law, basically, and that's what happened. And then we celebrated, right? So we
then
got
your
together and
wife
realized, like,
pulls the listings back up. We're moving to Brentwood, Randall.
She's not that type. She's not that type. But we, then the question is, right? So now these arbitrators have agreed that Austria should give us back 5 Klimt paintings.
You get to pick those?
Now what do you do? No, I mean the 5, right? The 5 that he owned. There had been one that he had donated before the war, but 5 of them, including this famous gold portrait. So now what do you do, right? And they set up
put it up above your bed.
Well, how do you get them out of town, right? You got to get them out of Dodge as fast as possible, right?
Yeah.
So I contacted Stephanie Barron, who's a curator at the LA County Museum of Art, who I knew, who deals with modern German, Austrian art, and I said, hey, how'd you like to have an exhibit at LACMA at the LA County Museum of Art? And she said, oh, when? I said, as soon as possible. Like, help me get these things out. And so they arranged then, the museum arranged to bring the paintings out of Austria.
Wow. And you guys had a thing at the LACMA?
Yeah, it was in April of 2006.
Wow.
And that for me was the best part, because Maria, it's funny because I didn't take a picture and I should have, but it was Maria with her whole family. So her kids, her nieces, nephews, her grandkids, all in one room with these 5 paintings. And she had always described going over to her aunt and uncle's house, especially after her aunt died, and visiting her uncle, and he had them all in this one room with the table and flowers in the middle, like a memorial to his deceased wife. And there she was again, sort of the last one who sort of remembered that, sitting there in this room or standing in this room with her whole family, and she became a hero to her whole family at this very late stage. She was 90 years old.
Yeah.
And for me, that was just the greatest thing, to be able to, as a lawyer and a friend, family friend, right, to be able to do this for this woman, Maria Altmann, and make her into a hero, right?
Yeah.
And,
must have been very rewarding.
Yeah. So that was my favorite part, and everything else has been sort of icing on the cake.
Wow. That is quite the journey. So what you said, 8 years in total?
8 years, 98 till 2006. So yeah.
Like how?
Yeah, was a long time. Was
it weird just being done with it? After it being such a big part of your life for so long?
Yeah, I mean, things continued a little bit. There were other issues. The next year, for example, there was an arbitration over the building, the home that they had, which also wasn't returned, and we got that back. So I did continue to do a few other things, but I really ultimately ramped down my law practice. I became president of the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust, actually right before the decision came through. So it was like good karma.
Yeah.
I agreed to take on this sort of building project for this old Holocaust museum here in Los Angeles. And then thanks to the money I got from the contingent fee, I was able to fund the building of that museum. It's just on the other side, right near where we are sitting right now, on the other side in Pan Pacific Park. And so I really worked then hard on curating and rebuilding and redesigning the permanent exhibit of that museum. So I did that for the next few years. For about a year, I was the acting executive director, and tried to do as much as I could with that. And then the film came out in 2015, which sort of reawakened interest in the case, and so there was a lot of things to do surrounding that, and premieres.
I guess a lot of media obligations and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I went on a dog and pony show with the director Simon Curtis.
You get to meet Ryan Reynolds and be like, "This is how I act."
Yeah, I actually only met him once on the last day of shooting here in Los Angeles, because they shot some of it here, and I'd offered to meet with him beforehand, and he's not a mimic actor, right? So I totally understand. He's like, no, I don't need to see you, because he's acting the role in the script, which is not 100%, me, right? Yeah. And so he didn't really need to make it me. He needed
Like I'd really like to just go over a few things with you.
Yeah. So he didn't do any of that. But I went then on this last day of shooting, and they had this really tough scene on the roof where he gets mad at the Maria character, which of course I never did. And
I think I know what you're talking about when she tells him, she's like, "Oh, that's it. Like, we're just gonna wrap it up."
Like, never happened. But anyway, so he's doing that tough scene, and then he walks over to me, and I was dressed, sort of like now, like a khakis and a shirt, and he's dressed the same way, and so he walks over to me, and it's just by accident because like this is how I dress, and he points at my clothes and points at him. He said, "Nailed it," and he did. I mean, it was like he was dressed exactly by accident, just the lame way that I act. They put up the clothes on eBay at one time. They call it geek chic, so that's my siblings make fun of me. Geek chic. But anyway, he had a very good sense of humor. I talked to him a little bit. He missed a lot of the premieres because he was having a baby and doing another film and stuff like that. So I actually only met him that one time. Helen Mirren I met a number of times, including on set, and she was super nice and friendly. And she told me a lot of things that I still remember. I mean, for one, I was just amazed watching how actors work. And I told her, I said, that you can repeat these lines verbatim, right? The same words exactly every single time they do a take. To me, is just incredible that you can memorize that and internalize it. Mm-hmm. And she says, "Oh, it's easy. When you're an actress, you learn to do these things. It's just second nature. It's no problem. What you did in going to the Supreme Court and speaking without a script, and now that is wonderful." And I mean, she was, buttering me up, but she it's easy for me, at least. It's easy to speak extemporaneously because that's, I guess, what I'm trained to do, and that's what she was saying. I've heard her speak extemporaneously. She can do that pretty well. Also, she's an amazing person. But she actually did use some depositions of Maria Altmann that I put on YouTube to try to get the accent.
Oh,
and so she told me, she said, that it was so nice of you to put those depositions up on YouTube. I used that, to practice Maria's accent and get some of the mannerisms. And she said, "And I have to tell you, that lawyer for the other side, he was such a jerk." Oh, wow. Like, never in my life would I ever get that type of validation. Right? Because lawyers, you always have these interactions with other lawyers where, either you're pissing them off or they're pissing you off. And in a deposition, it's one of those things. And oftentimes you'll have a deposition recorded, but no one ever looks at it, right? The case is settled. Like, no one ever views these things. And to get that type of feedback on the deposition,
it's like a witness. You're like,
yes, he was. So, anyway, that was one of the highlights for me. But I met her a number of times after that, and she's a terrific person. So, and without her, the film would not have been made. So that's how
you would have had happen. Jonah Hill playing you.
Well, not even that. I mean, it's the way films are made is they need a star vehicle in order to get the funding, because that sort of guarantees the interest that'll pay for it. And so without her deciding to do the film, it never would have been made. So she really made it.
Yeah, your story's interesting enough. If it wasn't Helen Mirren, we would have gotten some other.
I don't know. I mean, it certainly wouldn't have been as successful. So with her and Ryan Reynolds, they had some sort of chemistry, and the film stayed in theaters for 2 months. It was the most successful independent film of the year in 2015. It
was great. I remember seeing it back then as well.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazingly successful. And they knew. I remember them telling me when we were doing this dog and pony shows, it's like, "Oh no, we have no problem. We've tested it in Iowa or wherever they do these test audiences."
In Iowa,
and they say with like the least likely people to like it, and if they like it, then it's going places, right? And that's how they test these things out. Yeah. Right? Because, you show it to like a Jewish audience that's into the Holocaust. Like, of course they're going to like it. But
someone in the Midwest are like, we don't have any Jews around here.
Or, never heard of Gustave Klimt, never, don't care about any of these things. Yeah. If they like it, then it's going places. Yeah. And so, it did. It did very, very well.
That's awesome. What were the differences in like real movie? Obviously, this fight scene didn't happen. I guess in this fight scene in the movie, one I'm particularly
swear at Maria. Oh my God, it's like mortified every time I watch it. But they have to make. They have to
embellish it a little bit.
They have to when you're doing a film, it's 100 minutes, and you're doing 100 years of history because it starts with Klimt painting the painting. right, which is 1904, 5, 6, something like that, and goes to 2006, right? So it's 100 years of history compressed in 100 minutes. They got to do things, right? So, I mean, the best example is I never went to Austria with Maria. We went, each of us independently, but, we didn't have a lot of money to spend on this.
Yeah.
And so we took our different opportunities to go and try to press the case. But of course, in the film, we have to be going together, right, as a team. Yeah. The other one is, as I mentioned, we had a bunch of kids, 3 kids, and so they sent me the script, and it has my wife Pam, who's played by Katie Holmes, by the way, in the film.
Oh, that's right.
And it has her like having 2 kids, and I said, we have 3 kids. They said, well, no, we can't have Katie Holmes being pregnant the whole time, right? Like, it's only, we can only fit 2 kids in. I said, well, who's going to pay for the therapy for the kid that gets left out of the movie? Right? Like, what's going to happen? So
that would be your son Joey.
So
correct?
they combine the 2 boys into one. So it's Joey's birth, but they call the kid Nathan, so they could sort of pretend.
Got it. Okay.
And then that scene where I go to the Supreme Court, they have in the film, like, I'm picking out my tie, or Ryan Reynolds is picking out his ties, right, as me, and then Katie Holmes has her water break, like she's about to have the baby, and she says, "Oh, don't worry, dear, I'll take care of it. You go, help Maria." Yeah. Like, okay, that did not happen. Right?
Sure,
That's Hollywood.
Sure.
But the reason they put that in is that what really happened is my wife was 30 weeks pregnant with Joey when I went to Washington, and so she couldn't come with. And while I was preparing with Maria, it was a day and a half before the argument, I got a call from Pam, and she said, don't freak out, but I'm in the hospital. I had preterm labor, and they've got me on this medicine that they say everything's going to be okay. So, like, I'm preparing to go to the Supreme Court, and my wife goes into labor. So, of course, I told the screenwriter that, right? Because I knew
we like that.
They need these crazy things. So they invent this completely insane scene.
Yeah, right.
But even that is based on the truth.
Right. They're probably, we're going to make it a hard labor, too. We're like, that's a little too much.
And I mean, there are things left out. Like, Maria's husband, Fritz, was sent to Dachau, the concentration camp, in the summer of 1938, and that's nowhere in the film. And I asked the screenwriters, I was like, how could you not use that dramatic thing? He says that would have
Maria's husband,
Fritz.
Yeah.
And so
when did he go to Dachau? When was that?
So his older brother was a very wealthy sweater manufacturer, and he fled, like Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer, and all of his stuff was taken, but he was able to tell the people who owed money to his firm not to send it to Vienna. Like, he went to Budapest and Rome and all these places and said, give me the receivables. And he went immediately to England and started up a new company in Liverpool. He was a business genius, of course. And so in retaliation, the Nazis arrested his younger brother, Maria's husband. She had just been married. She was 22 years old, just been married in December. March, the Nazis come in, and I think it's May or June, he gets arrested. And is sent to Dachau, which is a concentration camp, the first concentration camp that the Nazis had outside of Munich. And it was not a good place. I mean, it wasn't as bad as it became later in the war, but it was still a place that many people didn't return from. And his older brother was able to raise money and pay a ransom to get him out of Dachau. And so they didn't want to do a whole film about that, which they, of course, could, because they said it would have to be too short, and people wouldn't understand. Like, how do you get out of a concentration camp? Like, that's not a thing that people understand. Yeah. And
too much of a distraction, I suppose.
And so they didn't. So there are a lot of things that are sort of left out and changed in the film. But what I really like is that they really were able to portray the sort of key elements, even changed in format, but the key events in a very accurate way for the most part. And so when I watch the film, it's like watching 2 films, right? So I see the film that Ryan Reynolds and Helen Mirren are acting out on screen, or if it's Tatiana Maslany, and like, I see what they're doing, and then I see, okay, here's the real thing that actually happened. At the same time, right? So it's very fun for me to watch the film.
Absolutely crazy story.
Yeah, it is a crazy story.
Tell me what you've been up to recently. You just got back from this trip to Vienna. Thank you so much for even responding to my email and getting back to me.
I go to Vienna pretty frequently. My
beautiful city, by the way.
It is very nice. My dad stepped down off the board of the Arnold Schoenberg Center in Vienna, and I'm.
Your family's on a lot of boards and
Well,
you
not
guys
so
have a lot
much.
of nice titles, you know?
Not
I
so
think
much.
maybe it's because of the strong last name that you have. I don't know.
I mean, it's the Schoenberg Center, so there should be a Schoenberg involved at some point. But I have meetings there, and so I was just there for that. But in the last year, I've actually made another film, a documentary film with my youngest son Joey, principally, and that is a completely different type of movie. But it's really sort of a documentary feature, so it's not done as a sit down and do an interview like this. It's more of an action film. The director Matthew Mashori decided to make it that way, and I drag my then teenage son, he was 18, on a trip to Europe, and we go to discover our roots, right, and research the genealogy, and ended up tracing back 500 years to a family that lived in the ghetto in Venice at the very beginning of the ghetto, which started in 1516 in
Venice, Italy.
Venice, Italy, yeah, not Venice, California.
Yeah, right.
So we start out here and we go there, and it's really a movie where it's about the relationship with me and my son, but also all the amazing people that we meet on the way who help us on the journey. It's like a treasure hunt.
Part of this documentary with your son to make up for the fact that he was kind of left out in a way in the other movie?
A little bit. Originally, the film, it was an idea actually that my cousin Serena, who's from Venice, Italy, she's a painter and filmmaker, and I said, I think I can trace back her mother and my father's ancestry all the way back to Venice, and she said, should be a film, and I mentioned it to a friend of mine who was making another film, Brad Schley, who's a producer, and this director Matthew Bashori, and they got excited about it, and originally it was going to be me and Serena and my cousin Arnie, sort of three musketeers going on this hunt. But then Joey came along. He was just finishing high school, and they immediately decided, it wasn't my decision, but it was the filmmakers, oh my God, this is going to be a much better film with a father-son dynamic, because Joey's like, oh, why are we going to a cemetery? That type of thing. And he's sort of the foil, he's like the audience, why do we care about this, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he has sort of a transformation as we go through it. And because it is an amazing journey that we take, and the imagery is beautiful from Vienna, Prague, and Venice. I mean, you could drop a camera and you take a beautiful picture in Venice. So it's pretty easy. But the filmmaking is super nice. The cinematography by Maciej Twardowski, a Polish cinematographer, is just amazing. And so we came up with this film. It was a end of pandemic project in 2022. And last year we've been premiering it at various festivals, and it was at the Woodstock Film Festival.
How's everything been so far?
Everybody loves it. We are 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's been getting really good reviews. So everybody's super happy. It's called Fioretta. We should mention the name of it, so in case anybody
spell
wants
it out for the audience.
Fioretta. She's the ancestor we find, not to spoil the whole thing, but she's the one we find in Venice 500 years ago, and it's doing really well. We premiered it in Woodstock and Woodstock, New York, and then Zurich, Switzerland.
I didn't even know Woodstock was still around. To be honest with
Woodstock is a beautiful little town in Hudson Valley, and Joey's going to culinary school right near there. It's called the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, in Hyde Park, New York, in the Hudson River Valley. It's absolutely beautiful. And anyway, Woodstock has a film festival, and so we premiered it there, and then we went to Zurich, Switzerland, and had a premiere there, and then the filmmaker Matthew Mashori and I flew to Israel. We were supposed to show it there on October 8th, so we arrived on October 6th.
Wow.
In the evening, and I went and visited my wife's cousin who lives in the south near Sderot. And I went back to the hotel and went to sleep, and the next morning there was a war, right? So there were bomb sirens. I was in bed, and there's sirens going off. I had no idea what to do.
And you're in the south part of the country.
And I was at Tel Aviv, so 6 hours earlier I was in the south. But,
wow.
But I was in Tel Aviv, and I just stayed in bed because I didn't know what to do. And I heard this big boom. There was a building about a half a mile away that got hit in that initial barrage.
Are you like terrified? I mean, I would be.
It was a weird experience, and not as bad, of course, for me as for so many other people and families in Israel. But it was a traumatic experience, and we arranged to leave then. That we got out on the Monday after on the 9th, but we showed our film virtually for the people who wanted to, and it wasn't for everybody. Obviously, people were preoccupied with other things, but I think
obviously there's other more important things to worry about at that point, but the reality of it does kind of suck that happens around your premiere.
Yeah, I mean, we thought the thinking was, we're there, we're here with them, and for the people who are sort of trapped in their apartment or in their house, and there are people who live alone and don't have anybody to be with and don't want to just sort of doom scroll or watch CNN repeat the same horrible images over and over again. It was a nice break. So we had about 120 people come online. And then we managed to show it then at the end of March this year. So we went back and showed it at the Anu Museum in Tel Aviv. And it was very well received. Everybody was happy. It was right before Iran attacked. Yeah. I thought, oh my God, if I go there again and something else happens, it's a sign, right? But no, I had a good experience the second time. And we've shown the film also at the Miami Jewish Film Festival, New York Jewish Film Festival, and then been screening around the country and in Europe, in Vienna. I have a screening coming up in Prague next month. So I've been doing a lot of traveling for that because it's good for the film. It's also fun for me to see how people are reacting to the film, and everybody stays. It's long. It's 2 hours, but everybody stays. Killers of the Flower Moon were 3 hours, right? So it's not unheard of that people sit for 2 hours. But everybody stays to the end, and then they stay afterwards to ask questions and talk. So I think people are really enjoying it. It's a beautiful film that Matthew Mashori made. So I hope people go and seek it out. In the last few weeks, it's gone on video on demand, so it's available on Amazon and Apple and most cable channels. So not Netflix, not the subscription services, but the ones where you can pay $4.99 or $5.99 or whatever to rent it.
Are your other kids like, hey, what the hell, Dad? Like
yes, a little bit of that. I mean, they're in the film a little bit in the beginning, but they're a little jealous.
Because all these great cities, going to go on these tours. I mean, is your son also going to these countries to help promote the film?
He's done. He went to Zurich, and he got it's part of the film where he wants to buy clothes from this guy who sells cloth, but also helps me with genealogy and. So he had a designed suit, a maroon suit with a cape that his cousin Mila designed. And at the premiere, he thought he was like a movie star. And
I bet it's an awesome experience for a kid. It's great, traveling the world.
Exactly. And now he's actually in Vienna. He has to do an internship because he's in culinary school. So he found a fancy restaurant in Vienna named Steirereck. And it's and he's peeling potatoes and chopping onions and whatever crazy stuff they do as chefs, but he's learning.
It's crazy to go back. I mean, with that last name, people are like,
I mean, they have programs now where the descendants of victims of the Nazis, and all four of my grandparents fled, and I had a great-grandfather was murdered, and many other family members. So families like mine are able to get citizenship now in these countries. So I got Austrian, I actually have Austrian, German, and Czech citizenship now. Joey just has Austrian, and so he's able to work there.
So are you German, Austrian, and Czech like blood? Is that why you have all?
It's just a matter of citizenship rules. So my grandparents are from Austria. I got actually the Austrian through my mother's side. On my father's side, they had Czechoslovakian citizenship, and my father's mother was born in what's still Czech Republic, but they had moved to Berlin in the 1920s and got citizenship there before leaving in the 1930s. So I have all that. I mean, in a perfect world, I would also have Slovakian and Hungarian because my grandfather's citizenship right was actually in what is now Bratislava, but used to be Pressburg or Posen was the capital of Hungary, and now
Yeah.
it's capital of Slovakia, right? So it just, in Europe, all these borders have changed, and so citizenship is a little bit different than we think of it here. But
Interesting.
yeah. Yeah. So anyway, you asked me what I do. That's one of the things I do is collect citizenships.
I was gonna say, well, when this country inevitably possibly falls to shit, then you have options.
I have a few options, but
that's
can never have too many passports. That's what
that is true.
What the lesson is of the Holocaust.
Open up your cabinet, you probably look like James Bond or
Austin Powers. Yeah,
exactly. A bunch of passports. What the hell? What's going on? A bunch of cash.
Right.
Crazy. What was I gonna ask you?
I don't know. I could ask you questions. I'm good at that.
By all means.
What's fishbowl? What is the fishbowl? Yeah.
Fishbowl is like an event that I do with my friends and just a bunch of close friends and family, I guess. But we just made this sign, and I made this sign a long time ago. I loved the sign. Just felt like too bad to. It was just sitting in the corner of my garage, had to use it.
Very cool. We went down. What did we have? We went to a restaurant. So my middle kid Nathan graduated from Chapman University on Saturday, and we went to a restaurant.
Congratulations.
In Tustin called Chaka or something like that. And
that sounds familiar, actually.
It was a very sort of cool place, and they had my wife ordered fish. It was really good. It's like reminds me of that because it was sort of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was like a big whole fish on the plate. It looked just like that.
All your kids are out of school now, right? Now your kids...
Well, Joey's still, in theory, he has one more year at the Culinary Institute after this internship. And Dora, our oldest, graduated from Washington University in St. Louis. She's now back here, and she wants to be a teacher. And so she's pursuing that. And Nathan just graduated, so who knows what he'll do. I think he wants to try acting for a while.
Yeah,
we'll
why
see.
not?
Just like everybody else in LA, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Except for me.
Exactly. You could be a waiter somewhere and just jet off and do your casting calls.
I guess. I don't know. Well, these days they don't even they just do it at home in front of a camera and they send them in.
Yeah, that too. Or you just got to be a nepo baby, which I guess I don't really know.
I'm totally not Hollywood. I mean, I have a friend who makes fun of me because I say I'm really not involved in any Hollywood stuff, and he says, "What do you mean you have 2 movies?
You're a Jewish attorney. I mean, that's as LA kind of entertainment world as it gets.
I did the first firm I worked at. We did some of that. I was on the bottom of the totem pole when we defended Kim Basinger in a very famous case.
Basinger. I know who Kim Basinger is. Can we disclose? What was the case?
She had initially agreed to do a film and then backed out. It was called Boxing Helena by Jennifer Lynch was the filmmaker. She's the daughter of David Lynch. And but they had never signed an agreement, and she had differences over the character and decided not to do the film, and they sued her and should have lost at the trial court, but after 4 weeks of trial, Kim Basinger lost, and the jury awarded millions of dollars in damages, more money than she had. And there was an argument as the baby lawyer on the case that I had made about the jury instructions being wrong, and that went up on appeal, and we actually won on appeal and reversed the judgment. But by then she had been forced into bankruptcy, and they sort of forced a settlement on her, which was really unfair, I thought.
Gonna spend all that money as soon as you get it.
That was very early in my career. It was like second year lawyer, and it was a great experience. I got to sit next to Kim Basinger in trial, and try to interpret what was going on.
What is she most famous for?
She was a Bond girl and I think a Playboy Playmate at one point, but she did L.A. Confidential. She won an Oscar, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know who she is. I know. I definitely
she
know
was
the face.
married to Alec Baldwin and had a kid, and but she divorced him and won an Oscar and had a great life after this lawsuit. Lawsuit was probably the low point in her life.
She was gorgeous,
and I was there for that, unfortunately. But it was a big deal for me. I learned a lot about trials and how they work.
First foray into law. Yeah,
I did a little. I mean, I was not in charge. I was, again, the baby lawyer on the team.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Randy, this has been super fun. I hope you've had a great time.
Thank you. No, I did. It's always fun to talk about Maria's case, and she was just a great lady.
Yeah. Inspiring story. No, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, that's why I think the movie did so well.
I guess, do you ever get reached out to people from like, I guess, like, for like legal advice who might be going through similar stuff?
I thought, when I won this great case in the Supreme Court, and then
You could be like this
huge
thought
thing,
leader
it's
in
like
this space.
Bill Gates is going to call me for his next case, but that's not what happens when you win a case like this. That's sort of an impossible one. Instead, you get every lost cause imaginable comes to you.
Yeah.
And I just am not qualified to do a lot of other things. It just so happened that my family was from Austria and Maria's family is from Austria, so I sort of knew.
Stars just aligned.
Knew enough, or thought I knew enough to do that. But even Holocaust restitution in other countries would be really, really difficult for me to do because I'm just not as familiar with them. So I tend to sort of help people find other people to do those type of things, but a lot of things are just not the same. Maria's case was sort of a unique opportunity for me to do something that really fit with my skill set. Being a guy who's interested in sort of genealogical research and history and things like that. And I was the right person at the right time.
Yeah.
For the right case, and for other cases, not necessarily true. So
we're all super lucky that those stars lined up.
I once got invited to talk about the case at, I think it was like Santa Monica Bar Association, and there were 6 lawyers getting up to talk about, and I was the last, and all 5 of the ones before me was like, I'm the greatest lawyer who ever lived, and I've never lost a case, and I'd won hundreds of cases. I'm the greatest expert in this, and then they would give their spiel, right? And I got up and I said, I lost almost every case that I ever handled except one. I'm going to tell you about that one. It was a good one. So I'm a one-hit wonder, and that's fine with me.
No, I would do the same thing. I think it's a story worth being a part of. Yeah. And the movie's awesome. Obviously, like I said, I was a big fan of the movie, big fan of work that you did, reached out. Thank you so much for getting back to me. And this has been super fun.
Thanks so much. I hope you get to watch Fioretta and enjoy that as well.
I'll definitely have to check it out. We'll definitely keep in touch. But thank you so much for doing this. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Awesome.